18 drones, one of the most critical oil hubs on Earth, and within minutes, Mina Al-Ahmadi was burning. What happened next has Gulf leaders on edge right now. Mina Al-Ahmadi was hit on Thursday, then hit again on Friday morning, the same refinery. The same target, 2 attacks in less than 48 hours, and one of the most important oil processing facilities on Earth, capable of handling 730,000 barrels every single day, is now burning. Nobody in the mainstream press is talking about the one number that explains everything. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why $200 is no longer a fantasy. This wasn't a single strike. It was a coordinated multi-target assault across the entire Gulf in under 24 hours. Iranian drone strikes hit 2 of Kuwait's main oil refining sites early Thursday morning, triggering fires at both facilities and forcing emergency air defense responses nationwide. The first wave hit an operational processing unit at the Mina Al-Ahmadi refinery. Minutes later, a second strike landed on the Mina Abdullah refinery, both operated by Kuwait National Petroleum Company, and together, according to verified reports, holding a combined refining capacity of roughly 1.2 million barrels per day. Kuwait Petroleum Corporation confirmed the attacks publicly, stating that Mina Al-Ahmadi had come under a number of hostile drone strikes, that fires had broken out in multiple units, and that sections of the refinery had been forcibly shut down. And if you think Kuwait was the only target, it wasn't. The Saudi Defense Ministry simultaneously confirmed a drone had crashed into the Samref oil refinery at Yanbu, hundreds of miles to the west. This was a regional operation, and it was timed deliberately. Iran launched these strikes as Kuwait was celebrating Eid al-Fitr, the holiest celebration marking the end of Ramadan. That timing was not accidental. It was a message, and markets heard it loud and clear. To understand why Iran went after Kuwait's refineries, you have to go back 48 hours earlier, to a moment that changed everything. On Wednesday, Israeli forces struck South Pars, the world's largest natural gas field, located offshore in the Persian Gulf and jointly owned by Iran and Qatar. That single strike was the explosion. Within 24 hours, Iran had attacked the world's biggest liquefied natural gas complex in Qatar, hit a gas field and associated facility in the UAE, fired missiles at a Saudi Arabian oil refinery, and launched drones on 2 Kuwaiti refinery units. One country. 5 targets. One day. Qatar Energy's own CEO, Saad Al-Kaabi, confirmed publicly that the Iran strike took out 17% of the country's entire LNG export capacity in a single operation. Here's the detail that the mainstream press largely buried. Iran had already published a list, a documented public list of facilities it said it would target in response to US and Israeli strikes. It wasn't a bluff. Tehran is working through that list, methodically, target by target, and Mina Al-Ahmadi was on it. The numbers in the oil market right now are not normal. They are historic. And they are still moving. Brent crude spiked to $119 per barrel on the day of the Kuwait attacks, before settling around $114 as traders digested the scope of the damage. But that single-day move is almost secondary context at this point. Zoom out slightly, and the picture becomes truly alarming. Brent has surged roughly 80% since this conflict began, driven primarily by the near-total shutdown of tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, the choke point that in peacetime handles approximately 20% of all global oil and gas flows. On March 9, 2026, WTI crude posted its single biggest weekly gain in recorded history, a staggering 35.6%. Brent simultaneously jumped to $108.20. The International Energy Agency called it, officially, the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. JP. Morgan projected regional production shut-ins of close to 7 million barrels per day by March 15th, rising to 12 million barrels per day by March 22nd, if Hormuz remains closed. Dubai crude, the Asian pricing benchmark, hit an all-time high above $150 a barrel, and the ceiling, according to most analysts, has not yet been reached. While oil grabbed the front pages, precious metals quietly told a different story, and frankly, a more important one for understanding where institutional money is actually moving. Following the initial strikes on Iran, gold prices surged above $5,400 per ounce. That's not a typo. Gold at $5,400. Investors didn't walk to safe haven assets, they sprinted. Silver moved in lockstep, with spot prices rising 1.68% to $95.35 per ounce in a single session. And the big banks are not calling a top. JP Morgan has put out a formal projection of $6,300 per ounce for gold by the end of 2026. Deutsche Bank is sitting at a $6,000 year-end target. These are not fringe forecasts. These are the largest financial institutions on the planet putting numbers on paper. What's particularly striking is what is not acting as a safe haven. Bitcoin has failed to perform the role its advocates claimed it would in a geopolitical crisis. Institutional capital is going to tangible physical assets: gold, the Swiss franc, the Japanese yen, and US treasuries. The old playbook is back, and it's working exactly as the old playbook always has. Everything, the oil price, the gold price, the panic in Gulf equities, flows back to one 21-mile wide bottleneck, the Strait of Hormuz. And right now it is effectively closed. The IEA confirmed that crude and oil product flows through the strait have dropped from around 20 million barrels per day before the war to what it described as a trickle. The production of Kuwait, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE collectively fell by a reported 6.7 million barrels per day by March 10th. By March 12th, that number had climbed to at least 10 million barrels per day. For everyday American consumers, this is not abstract. U.S. gas prices spiked to their highest level since 2023, up nearly $1 per gallon since the conflict began. By mid-March, a gallon of regular gasoline hit $3.84 nationally, and that number is still moving north. The airspace story is equally staggering and largely unreported. Closures across the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain have triggered over 4,000 daily flight cancellations, stranding hundreds of thousands of passengers and generating billions in losses for carriers, including Emirates and Qatar Airways. The Gulf's entire economic infrastructure is seizing up, and the Strait is the reason why. Here's what the mainstream coverage largely ignored, and this may be the most consequential detail of this entire conflict. Iran is not simply closing the Strait of Hormuz. According to CNN, citing Iranian security sources, Tehran is in active discussions with 8 countries outside the Middle East to grant selective safe passage through the strait, but only for tankers carrying oil priced and traded in Chinese yuan, not dollars. Yuan. Think about what that actually means. Under the cover of a shooting war, Iran is engineering a yuan for oil corridor. It's weaponized de-dollarization, executing the thing that analysts have theorized about for a decade, in real time, while the world watches the fires. Then there is Australia. A country located 7,000 miles from the Persian Gulf quietly authorized the release of up to 762 million liters of gasoline and gas oil from domestic emergency reserves on March 13th, reducing its mandated stockholding obligations. And in Kuwait and Iraq, storage facilities have hit 100% capacity, forcing both countries to declare force majeure, legally canceling contracted deliveries. The critical detail buried in that fact: oil infrastructure that gets physically switched off cannot be restarted instantly. Even after a peace deal, prices may stay structurally elevated for months. Every time a major oil shock hits, someone brings up 1973, and for once the comparison is actually useful, because the scale of what's happening now dwarfs that crisis in almost every meaningful dimension. The 1973 Arab oil embargo removed roughly 7% of global supply. Prices quadrupled inside months. The current disruption is running at 10 to 12 million barrels per day, multiples of 1973 in raw volume, hitting a global economy that is far more financially interconnected and leveraged than it was 50 years ago. The highest Brent crude has ever closed in history was $147.50 per barrel, at the peak of the 2008 financial crisis. Adjusted for today's dollars, Al Jazeera calculated that figure equates to approximately $224 per barrel. The IMF has quantified what this means for the global economy. Every sustained 10% rise in oil prices correlates with a 0.4% increase in global inflation and a 0.15% reduction in economic growth. Wood Mackenzie analysts said Brent hitting $150 is now the base case, and that $200 is, in their words, not outside the realms of possibility. Here is the critical distinction from every prior oil shock. In 1973, in 1990, in 2008, the refinery infrastructure itself was never being destroyed. Today, the IEA has confirmed that over 4 million barrels per day of refining capacity is directly at risk from ongoing attacks. Rebuilding that capacity takes years, not weeks. So where does this go from here? There are 3 signals that analysts are watching more closely than any others right now. First, the Strait of Hormuz reopening timeline. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has stated publicly that Israel is actively assisting the U.S. in reopening the strait, and claimed that Iran has lost the ability to enrich uranium and manufacture ballistic missiles. But tanker traffic remains paralyzed. Claims and reality are not the same thing, and the market is trading on reality. Second, the $200 threshold. The IEA announced the largest emergency reserve release in its history, 400 million barrels. The U.S. committed to tapping 172 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve across 120 days. By the IEA's own assessment, these releases have done almost nothing to contain prices. One analyst put it plainly: if Iran were to target a refinery outside the Gulf, Rotterdam, or a U.S. facility, prices could go, in their words, absolutely apocalyptic. That scenario, which would have sounded unthinkable in January, now sits within the credible risk envelope. Third, the yuan corridor. If Iran formally executes the arrangement to let yuan-denominated tankers through, while blocking dollar-denominated ones, we are no longer just watching an oil crisis. We are watching a structural challenge to the petrodollar system that has anchored global trade since 1974. That is a $200 number you were promised at the start, and now you know exactly what's behind it. If Iran is selectively letting yuan-denominated tankers through the strait while blocking dollar-denominated ones, are we watching the beginning of the end of petrodollar dominance? Drop your answer below.